Good morning. So we are starting a new section in Tanya. Not a new sorry, not a new section, but it's a new part in the discussion in Tanya, chapter 35. Um, there was I've said the story before, but there was once someone walking down the street and he sees two people and they're going down the street, two city workers, and one of them's digging holes and the other one's going right behind them and filling them up. Remember the story? So this seems like one is just destroying the work of the other and he doesn't understand what's going on. So he goes over to the gentleman and he says, what are you doing? Why are you just destroying your friend's work? So he says, no, you don't understand. We're really a team of three. He digs the hole. There's another guy that puts the seed inside, and then I fill it up. The other guy called in sick today, but we figured why waste a day's work. He's not here, so we're just continuing to do our work.
Okay.
And I tell you this story now for a reason. Um, we're going to be spending the next couple months in the next three chapters talking about uh, the purpose of life, if you will, like our mission statement, the mission statement of life, why we're here, why the world is here, what's the purpose of it all. And in life also you can encounter situations that seem like one person's digging a hole and the other person's filling it up. People are born, they live and die. What was accomplished? People create things, other people consume them. Sometimes they seem like important things, other times they seem not important things. What was accomplished here? Even doing good things, you're nice to someone, you help them out, and the next day they need help again. What was accomplished? What's the point of needing help? What's the point of what life looks like? Just this back and forth. And if there is no purpose to life, um then life can be a drag. And so the purpose to life would be this seed that's placed in the ground. And if you don't have that seed, then life can look like these two people, one digging a hole and the other filling it up, with literally no purpose in sight. So I don't know. Maybe we'll ask the question. Does anyone here know or think they know what their purpose in life, or have a feeling of, or have come up with a purpose that they wake up in the morning for, and go throughout the day and make sure things are taken care of, and either go to work or take care of the family, or what's your purpose for living?
My kids.
Your kids. Anyone else? Was that always your answer? If you would have been asked this question each year for the last 75 years, would you have always answered that question?
Oh no.
No. Okay.
I don't want to throw uh, cold water in the fire here,
Okay.
but
I get it.
Be my guest.
perhaps perhaps the existentialists are right when they say it's absurd. It's an absurd thing that we do, and so we have, but that means we have a responsibility um, to be the best we can be, to to always function at your peak level.
So that's your purpose. Your
And,
purpose
and,
is
and
to
that
function.
that would be a purpose.
Okay.
But in the broader context, it's pretty absurd.
Okay. So fine. Right. What you're saying is, it makes perfect sense. In other words, you're proving the idea here that there needs to be a purpose. Whatever the purpose, in other words, we can come up with a purpose, but there needs to be something. Otherwise, it's a drag and a futile endeavor that seems to have no rhyme or reason. And if we want to live out life as long as our bodies can handle it, we better find the purpose quickly.
I might even add, if that were the case, then life would be nothing but a prison.
Okay.
And what's the point of that?
Right.
And there's no purpose in prison.
That's why there's no prison in Judaism.
Yeah.
In other words, there's either a restitution There's either lashes and you enter society, and if you can't enter society, there's death. There's no life
No,
when there's no purpose.
no, yeah,
Right.
no incarceration.
But your purpose, like you just said, over the last 6 years, um, has my purpose been the same? No. I, you don't know any better. At each point in your life, your purpose changes as you learn more and more. You couldn't ask me when I was 15 what my purpose in life was. Yeah, it was to make the varsity team. Be in the varsity team and get my cover, okay? You know,
So now I want this to be the invitation to join me on this journey for the next couple of months, because I think it's pretty clear that if we rely on ourselves to find a purpose, we may think we found a purpose and it may satisfy us for a while, but there inevitably will come a time when that purpose will not or might not satisfy us. Now, when you're 80, it's hard to think of a time that will come that your purpose won't satisfy you anymore. Fine. But for most people, for most of their lives, the purpose at any given point, because it's a man-made purpose, because it's a purpose they came to on their own, there is high likelihood of that purpose changing. Yeah, you reach your midlife, crisis befalls, you get a little older, the kids are not any more reliant on you, they're not any more turning to you, you're not working anymore, your family's taken care of sort of automatically with the investments you made. Do you still really need to be here? So therefore, we want to address this from the start.
So philosophically, if we're reading Tanya, it would say that it's to have a relationship with God.
Well, let's see.
To strengthen that relationship as we grow and we learn and have other experiences in our life with God can grow and change.
You would think, and in a certain sense, you're correct, but we'll soon see it's a little more revolutionary than that, a lot more practical than that, and a lot more attainable than that. Attainable in a certain sense. But you're on the right path. In other words, if you want, and by the way, technically speaking, if you don't want, if you're not Jewish, you don't want to know what Judaism says or what God says, you're going to have to look for a purpose that's outside of you, that you can trust till the day you die. Otherwise, your purpose again is going to change. And then you might end up regretting half of your life because you were following a false god, so to speak. In other words, in the moment you were caught up in a purpose that wasn't really, as it turns out later on in life, not worth living for, not worth putting in all that effort for. So this is what Alter Rebbe is going to do in the next 3 chapters. The first, the Alter Rebbe is going to speak about the purpose of our life, but really the Alter Rebbe is also going to get to the purpose of the world, the purpose of existence, and then what exactly it is we're doing here, and what our purpose is. Okay, so this question of what's the purpose of life is not just a philosophical question, but it's also a question that influences life. Because why is it so important practically to have a purpose in life? Practically, not just
It affords a direction.
oh,
It affords a path that you can follow.
in other words, when I'm conflicted, should I go to work or stay home with my wife? Should I invest my money or buy a Ferrari? It informs decisions I make in life. Based on my purpose, I live my life like that. So therefore, if we want, so knowing our purpose in life isn't just a philosophical exercise. It's an exercise that's very much necessary to the day-to-day life of a person. If we live without purpose in life, we end up regretting a lot of the things we do. Even living with a purpose, we don't always make the purposeful choices, and we end up regretting those. Imagine living without a purpose. But one of the things that you see as a result of this is what we would call, let's say, quality time. Yeah. a person, how do you define? Every person has sort of a definition that they say, I want to spend some quality time with or doing something. And at different parts of your life, that quality time would mean different things. When you're a student, quality time might be studying. When you're in kindergarten, quality time would be playing with your friends. When you're married without kids, quality time might be spending with your wife or with your spouse. Quality time as a parent would be spending with your kids. Quality time changes, but it changes based on the purpose that we have for life, the purpose that we're engaged in. So let's take children for example. I have to change the baby's diaper. I have to bathe the children. I have to feed them. I have to take them shopping. I have to. I take them shopping. I tell them stories. I smile with them. I comfort them. I I do many things with them. Which of those things, if you were to categorize, which of those things would be considered quality time? Generally speaking, which things would go into quality time with your kids? Probably,
All of them.
but if you had to, in other words, quality time with your kids would you would usually say, I'd rather quality time would be more telling them a story than changing their diaper. Now, if the child needs a diaper change and you say, I want to spend quality time with you, I'm going to tell you a story, I'm not going to change your diaper. Obviously, we're not talking about that, right? But when you come home from a day's work and you say, I want to spend some quality time with my kids, are you going to run to Target and buy some clothing for them? Or are you going to sit down with them and tell them a story? Tell them a story. Are you going to ask them how their day was, or are you going to ask them what they want for lunch tomorrow if you want to spend quality time with them?
How their day was.
Oh, now, if they're going to school in 10 minutes, the carpool's coming and they don't have lunch, don't start asking them how their day was. Ask them what they want for lunch, right? Obviously, we understand that. And at that moment, that's quality time. But generally speaking, the emotional things we do with our children, with our friends, with our family, those are the things we usually identify as spending time that we consider quality time. We consider it a good investment of our time in doing those things, whereas the other things are necessary. But if you had to choose what to do for the rest of your life with your children, you wouldn't choose changing diapers, you would choose telling stories or sharing ideas with them, right? Sharing feelings and ideas with them. So generally speaking, from a human perspective, emotions identify quality time. When I find purpose in something, it emotionally attracts me. Doing it is considered quality time. Someone's more invested in their business than in their family, they will see spending time at work more qualitatively than they will spending time with their family. Spending time with their family will be a chore. Going to work will be purpose. The minute they shift focus, work becomes a chore and family becomes purpose. What about when it comes to God, to our relationship with God? What would you identify as spending quality time with God? Shaking a lulav, putting on tefillin, or praying, studying Torah, developing a love for God? What would you consider to be quality time?
Praying and studying.
Praying and studying. I think most people would identify that as sort of a building emotions and meditating and developing relationships. These are things we would consider spending quality time. However, when we look at Torah sources, we see the exact opposite. In Ethics of Our Fathers, it says, Lo hamedrish iker, the medrash, in other words, the studying, the surrounding is not the main thing. Action is the main thing. It also says in Ethics of Our Fathers that a person's actions should be more than his wisdom. His good deeds should be more than his wisdom. There's even a whole debate in the Talmud whether action is greater or study is greater. You know what the conclusion of the Talmud is?
Action.
No.
Study.
But the Talmud says study is greater, but the Talmud says why? Why? Because study leads to action. So in other words, what's greater? Action. In other words, in essence, action is greater, but without study, you don't know what to do. So if you don't know what to do, there's no action.
That's why the phrase actions speak louder than words.
To magnify this, let me give you an example. So my great grandfather sat in Russian gulag for 7 years for the. I think he was sentenced 7 years. He ended up maybe sitting, I think 3.5 years. But anyhow, I'm not sure exactly the amount of years. A few years he sat in Russian prison, and the first year, his wife, his to be wife, was supposed to send him matzah for it was a exile, a labor camp, and his wife was supposed to send him matzah for Pesach. Unbeknownst to him, the matzah came, and the mailman held it back, but he didn't know that. They never delivered the matzah. So for 8 days, he refused to eat. He drank, he refused to eat because it was chametz. Now, what happened? The first night of the Seder, sitting, waiting for months for his matzahs to come, they didn't come. He's sitting the night of the Seder. He took, I think he had like 3 sugar cubes that he used for matzah in place of matzah. And he had a Seder, dying inside to eat matzah, but not being able to. When they saw his resolve, they gave him the matzah and he saved it for the next year in case the matzah next year didn't come. Then you have a Jew in Elgin or elsewhere, isn't observant, has no intention of eating matzah by the Seder, but the rabbi shows up at his door, brings him a matzah and asks him a personal favor, eat some matzah the night of the Seder. He's really not interested, but he may even feel that he's being compelled to eat the matzah. Zero interest. Which of these 2 Jews did the mitzvah of eating matzah? The second one. My grandfather didn't eat matzah that Pesach. Now, will he be punished for not eating matzah? No. It says someone who's it's an accident, they're not able to do the mitzvah, fine. There's no punishment. It's even, in some places, it says it's considered as if he did the mitzvah because he wanted to and he couldn't. But at the end of the day, he didn't do the mitzvah. And so nowadays, there's no necessarily practical application of this. But in biblical times, what happens if you didn't have the Passover sacrifice or eat matzah on the first Pesach? 30 days later, there's what's called the second Pesach. So if they lived in biblical times, my grandfather would have to bring the second Pesach, whereas this Jew who didn't want to eat the matzah, didn't care about the matzah, didn't think about anything about the matzah, but ate the matzah, wouldn't have to bring a second Pesach. So the first question is, why is action in Judaism the main thing? Now, you want to say more important, at certain times it might be more important. We're not talking about importance. That could be a little more difficult but rank. If you want to rank, what's higher on the poll? Doing the mitzvah or the intention of the mitzvah? Doing it. No question. Now the question is, before we even understand why that is, now that we understand that from a Jewish perspective, what's more important in life is action, that means our purpose in life is action. Not so much, or not as much as intellectual and emotional.
But isn't studying Torah action? Because
It's a mitzvah to study Torah.
yeah, I mean it's an action.
Sure. So that is true in a sense. That is true. However, the biblical mitzvah of studying Torah is limited to certain parts of Torah, and in under certain circumstances. In other words, you have to be learning the Torah that informs action. That's the mitzvah in the Torah. The mitzvah to study Torah infinitely, that's a rabbinic mitzvah in nature. So it's a sort of on a different level. But the element of, for example, a person adapting the Torah to his own mind and trying to be creative in Torah, you never know if that's Torah or not until you develop an idea, right? And you see if it fits with Torah or not. That whole process is studying Torah, but it's not necessarily the mitzvah. You're not going to know what to do because of that. So it's not the mitzvah of studying Torah. This question this whole conversation, the Alter Rebbe identifies in one word in the verse, And if you remember, although we don't have book one, so we can't look at the beginning. Do you remember the very first page in Tanya, what this whole book is based on? Which verse in the Torah this whole book is premised on? Oh, it says in the introduction?
Yeah, in the introduction of this one, it says, the first paragraph.
God, for the matter is very near to you in your mouth and in your heart that you may do it. Yeah. It's not in the heavens. It's not right that you say it's not. This is Moses' last days of life at the end of Deuteronomy. He's trying to encourage the Jews. No, before on the cover page, all the way at the beginning.
Very, very, before it gets into it.
Even before that,
We'll get there.
title page. Right, after.
And then
Not yet.
Yep.
No. Go to this page right here.
This
Read that paragraph.
compiled from sacred books and from sages, exalted saints, whose souls are in Eden, based on the verse, for it is exceedingly near to you, in your mouth and in your heart to do.
That's the whole Tanya is premised on these
Yeah.
words.
And that directly relates to we will do and we will.
Oh, so yeah.
It
So
seems to me.
so the first 17 chapters in Tanya explained that it's close to you. Really? Sometimes it's very difficult for me. Alter Rebbe explains that there. Then from chapter 18 to 25, Alter Rebbe explains the next word. Very close. Ma'od, very close. One word, again, one word. Then in these chapters, 35 to 37, Alter Rebbe is going to explain the last word, to do it. Now, after these 3 chapters that Alter Rebbe is going to build up action, now the question is going to come, so what about our heart? So where do feelings and emotions fall in? The rest of Tanya from chapter 38 through 53, the next 16 chapters are going to be explaining where emotions come in, what their place is, how to create them, how to sustain them, what to do with them, etc. Okay. So the very first, we're just going to read the first paragraph here. Let us elucidate. This is chapter 35, page 464 in the lessons in Tanya. Let us elucidate still further the term that you may do it in the verse. For the matter is very near to you in your mouth and in your heart that you may do it. Whereas mentioned, the climax of this verse is its emphasis on action. So what is this action that our whole life is to do? What does that even mean? It's hard for us as humans to identify with that even. And what's the purpose in that? Yeah, there's the famous story of the rich man that came to the Alter Rebbe and poured out his heart that he gives a lot of money to charity. He built a whole lodge, like a whole hotel, and it's a free hotel for poor people that are traveling, collecting money. They get to stay there free of charge. They get food. They even get some pocket change when they leave to continue their travels. But he always feels that he's in it for himself. He enjoys very much the thanks he gets more than the feeling of helping the poor person. And because he's been working on himself and he realized how egotistical he is, he was asking Alter Rebbe if maybe he should close down his operation because it's just building his ego. And Alter Rebbe thought for a minute. Alter Rebbe said, yeah, but the poor person is really eating.
Yeah.
You have to work on your feelings maybe, but the poor person, the action is being done. The action element of it is happening 100%. And therefore, that's the main thing. Okay. The second question, and the more important question Alter Rebbe is going to address here, right? If you look at the beginning of the next paragraph, it says, let us also understand. What is the second question? What does the Alter Rebbe also want to understand? Why we're here to begin with. What's our purpose? But in this question can be asked on 3 levels. Alter Rebbe is going to ask it on the highest level. Well, this question, let's build up a little bit how this question can be asked. If we ask the question on its most basic fundamental level, now this is taking into account we're talking to Jews who are studying Tanya and others who believe God created them, and therefore there is a purpose, a God-given purpose. Yeah. But the first question is, we need to understand what our purpose. In other words, once I know I'm alive, I'm a Jew, God gave me a purpose, I need to identify what that purpose is in order to know what to do. And this is not just relegated to humans. This is technically every creation has to know that. Now, no other creations besides humans know something outside of themselves. So the table inherently knows its purpose. And that's why the table can't do anything but its purpose. The table can't get up and start walking away if its purpose is to be used to put books on. Yeah, it can't. Even an animal can't do something that's not its purpose. Judaism speaks about how an animal, everything they do is born into them, and that's why when you see an animal do something that's uncharacteristic, what do you say? There must be something. The animal must be sick. The animal shows up in the middle of the day and it's a nighttime animal. There's something wrong with it. Yeah, an animal that doesn't usually kill people, that kills someone, there must be something wrong. Someone must have done something to provoke it. You don't expect it to happen because an animal doesn't do that. Animals do what they were created to do. In other words, animals inherently know, again, not necessarily knowledge the way we know something as something separate, but they know. Because we are able to know something separate, we're able to know something about ourselves, which is uniquely human. So therefore, we have an obligation to try to figure out what our purpose is, to know what we should live life for. For example, if God would say, your purpose is to sing and dance, if we believe God created us, if we believe that was our purpose in life, we'd probably get up tomorrow or today and start singing and dancing for the rest of our lives. Because that's our purpose. And doing anything but our purpose will not bring us fulfillment. So the first question, the first element of this, to answer this question, go look in the Torah. The Torah says, what's your purpose? Yeah. Torah tells us what to do. But there's another element of this purpose that, of this question, why were we created, that can only be asked once you are a little more knowledgeable in Torah and in Judaism. Every morning we say in our morning prayers, the very first blessing we say after the washing hands and the blessing for using the facilities, the very first blessing we say is, God, the soul that you placed in me is pure. You created it, you formed it, you breathed it into me, and you will in the future take it from me and return it to me in the next world. In other words,
Okay, in the time to come.
Time to come.
Does that mean the next world, or does that mean
no,
I'll get it back? I go
Well,
to sleep and I wake up, I get my.
yeah, but ultimately in the macro, it's when Mashiach comes. In the macro. In the micro, it's tomorrow. Yeah. So in other words, we're identifying in this prayer that we have a soul, and this soul is a piece of God. So now, when do we think the soul experiences itself? When does the soul get to experience itself? How often during our lives does the soul get to experience itself? In other words, its connection to God. On Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, maybe a Shabbos, maybe when you put on tefillin. If you're very religious and you daven 3 times a day, maybe at some point, if you're lucky, at some point during those 3 times a day when you're studying, at certain points the soul gets to experience itself. Most of the time, what are we experiencing? Our body. So here we took a soul that's a part of God, that experienced God 100% of the time, and we place it into a body that experiences God a minority of the time, a small percentage of the time. So we have to come up with an excuse. We have to justify, why did God take such a lofty soul and lower it into a world where it doesn't get to experience itself so often? I'll give you a simple example. If you go and buy a house, and then you go and demolish the house and build a new one. If I ask you, why did you demolish the house and build a new one? Why didn't you just live in the house that was there? Or why didn't you just renovate that house? You better have, not better, I don't mean you better, but you probably, for your own self, better have a good excuse why you thought it was necessary to demolish the whole thing and rebuild it instead of just investing a little money and fixing it up, right? There must have been something so wrong with it that it was worth it to break the whole thing down to rebuild it up. Any time we have a descent, it must be for an elevation, an ascent that justifies the descent. When you spend money on something, you're losing money, but you're gaining something. You would never spend more money than the thing is actually worth to you. Now, you may say this thing is very pricey. What? How could they charge so much for this? But if you're going to buy it, that means that to you, the value justifies the cost. If you start spending money on things and the value that you get isn't is lower than the amount of money you spent, what is your spouse, parent, or good friend going to tell you?
You're crazy.
You're crazy. Go get someone else to sign your checks. Don't carry a credit card with you, right? God takes a soul and puts it into this world, which is clearly sort of like a prison for the soul. There must be a reason, a benefit to the soul that comes as a result of this descent. So it's not just anymore a question, why was I created? Okay, once I know a purpose, now I'm going to go and dance and sing for the rest of my life. That purpose has to answer the question, has to satisfy my soul that's pained by the fact that it's not with God anymore. It's not at home all day. It only gets to experience home part of the day. My soul needs some sort of satisfactory answer to live life happy. So the Alter Rebbe is going to, we'll see, word this question, not just why am I alive, but why did my soul come down into this world? Why did my soul descend into this world? And for this, we need to have an answer for the purpose of my soul in this world, what it will accomplish, and what will be the benefit to the soul for accomplishing this purpose, which justifies its descent. Yeah, there's a famous question people always ask: why do we celebrate a birthday? We celebrate a child's birthday even before they know what's going on. So we're obviously happy the child was born. But eventually the child grows up and the child starts celebrating their own birthday. But when you think about it, why are we so excited? Why are we so happy about the birth? And if you open the Talmud, there's a debate. There's a debate in the Mishnah. The the Mishnah asks the question, is it noach lo, it's not better. Is it, well, we'll use the term as better, but is it better for the person to be born or not to be born? And the Talmud answers, better not to be born. Now, the Talmud doesn't use the words good. It says noach lo. Noach lo means comfortable. Is it easier, so to speak, to be born or not to be born? And the answer is obviously it's not. It would have been much easier just not to have been here. So in order to celebrate a birthday, you have to believe that although it would be easier not to be here, it's better to be here. But you gotta back that up. Why is it better to be here? If I wouldn't have been born, I would never know that I wasn't here. That would have made life, which either existed or didn't exist, much easier. So now that I'm here, it's definitely harder than not being here. The only way to celebrate is by knowing that it's better to be here, that there's something I'm gaining from being here. How many people can answer the question of what they gained, why it was better for them to have been born and lived? Not just, I'm satisfied with my life, I accomplished, but why is that better than not have been born to begin with? Better. It's harder. Why is that better? But then there's even a deeper element to this question that only arises once we learn Tanya. Yeah, so far, it's clear. There's an element here that arises once we learn Tanya. We learned up until now that the Tanya was written for who? A Beinoni, for a struggler, not for a tzaddik. What's a Beinoni? A Beinoni is someone who, although manages to control himself and conquer his actions, will struggle till the day he dies. Will always struggle. This feeling can be terribly, terribly demoralizing. A person is willing to do a lot of work if they see results. It's very, very difficult to work and not see results. For most people, washing the dishes and folding the laundry is very difficult. It's more difficult than other things, even eating, which, but even for many people, preparing food and eating is difficult. Why? Because I know tomorrow I'm going to do the same thing. I don't see the tangible results. There's a metaphor that's brought about what do you call a sharecropper, someone who cut wheat. Yeah, he had the sickle and he sat in the field and cut stalks, grain. And the king was passing by the field and he saw the technique and the ease and the speed with which this it was beautiful to watch. The king just stopped and stared at this person working in the field. And then the king thought for a minute, it's so entertaining. He went over to the guy and he said, "How much do you make an hour?" So he said, "I make a few dollars an hour." So he said, I have a proposition for you. Quit your job, come to the palace. I'll pay you a golden coin every day, and you just have to sit in my throne room and do the same motions. The guy was excited to make a year's wages in one day and have all his provisions paid for and living in the palace. So he goes. 2 days later, he goes to the king. He says, "I can't do this anymore." So he says, "Why?" And it's obvious, right?
There's no purpose.
There's no purpose. He can't do it after 2 days. He's been doing this for years. And it's much harder work, labor, to actually cut the wheat. He can't do it after 2 days. And we know based on Tanya, we will never get rid of our evil inclination. We will never stop having hatred. In other words, experiencing those feelings. We're going to have to battle them till the day we die. Perhaps it may get easier at times. It may, we may learn techniques, but we will always be struggling at some point. It will seem futile. So even if I can find a purpose for living, I need to find a purpose that'll satisfy this never-ending hamster wheel that seems to go nowhere. One of the older Hasidim of the previous generation, his great-grandchildren were my classmates. He lived in Pittsburgh, and he moved there I think in the 30s or the 40s. Maybe no, he moved to America in the 40s. He moved there and started the first Jewish day school. And one day when he was very old, one of his first students came to visit him. He knocked on the door. He didn't answer. After a few minutes, he finally came to the door, and he looks at the guy, and he doesn't recognize him. So the student's like, "You don't recognize me, Reb Shaul? You don't recognize?" He's like, "No." So he reminds him. After a few minutes, like it dawns on him, he's like, come inside. So he comes inside. He says, let me tell you something. In my age, I don't see as well as I did. I don't hear as well as I did. I don't remember things many things that happened. I could barely stand for sometimes. Sometimes I am so I so can't identify, like, recognize myself, that I question whether I'm alive. You know how I know I'm alive? Because my evil inclination is still as strong as it was. In other words, this is something that Alter Rebbe is preparing us to learn to deal with, this disappointment almost, that no matter what battle we seem to win, there's another one on the horizon waiting for us, which is, for most people, this is a demoralizing thing, especially when we're talking about something so important, that you're going to have to work every day and never see results. Every day you're going to work, you're going to win battles, and the next day you're not going to see the results of that. You may not see the results of that battle. So let's see this question inside. So the first part of the chapter, the first line, Alter Rebbe wants to explain to do, action. What's this emphasis on action? But now the deeper, more philosophical question that's very much related to this first question. Let us also understand the last paragraph of page 464. In a very small measure, at least, the purpose in creating Beinanim. Remember, Beinanim, because tzaddikim, we know what the purpose is. They come to perfection, they sustain the world, etc. To be and remain forever on the level of Beinanim. For as explained in chapter 14, the souls of the Beinanim are usually incapable of rising to the level of tzaddik through their own will and effort. They were created to be Beinanim. That's one question. In other words, the question of why the struggle. What's the purpose of the struggle? Also, we want to understand the purpose of their soul's descent. This world being clothed within an animal soul, deriving from the klipa and sitra achara, the very antithesis of the divine soul. In other words, what's the purpose of doing this, since they will not be able to banish the animal soul throughout their lives, nor even dislodge it from its place in the left part of the heart, so that no evil imaginings rise from it to the brain? Inasmuch as in the Beinanim, the essence of the animal soul derived from the klipa remains in its full strength and potency as at birth for his whole life. He's going to have a strong animal soul. So what's the point of fighting it if you're never going to weaken it? Except that its garments, in other words, its forms of expression, as evil thought, speech, and action, do not clothe themselves in their body, as mentioned above in chapter 12. In other words, where the Alter Rebbe explains that by means of constant battle with his animal soul, the Beinoni prevents the budding evil of this soul from expressing itself in his thought, speech, and action. So the purpose of the Beinoni's effort throughout his life is to control that this evil inclination inside never expresses itself in thought, speech, and action. And that's a whole lifetime work, but you're never actually going to affect the evil inclination itself. So if this is the case, why then did their souls descend to this world? To strive, and now the Rebbe uses pretty harsh, pretty strong term here, to strive in vain, God forbid. In other words, to the Beinoni, his life seems purposeless, useless. Why then did their souls descend to this world to strive in vain, God forbid, waging war all their lives against their evil inclination, yet never being able to vanquish it?
You know, it's maybe my overthinking the situation. Rashi doesn't have to do anything. They stay evil, they're done. The tzaddik doesn't do anything. They're a tzaddik and they study and they're a tzaddik. The Beinanim struggles the whole life and never accomplishes.
Never changes himself, never becomes a tzaddik. Now, the Rasha has no permission to be Rasha all his life, but he doesn't care.
Right.
The Beinoni cares enough to try to struggle to be good. And that's right. So the Rasha isn't bothered by the existential questions. The Rasha just cares about having a good time. The tzaddik isn't bothered by the existential question because the tzaddik sees what he accomplished. He became one with God. He now lives a godly, devout life. He has a free choice. He can still, he's never secure, but technically he sees what he accomplished. The Beinoni has a much harder time seeing what they accomplished. Not much harder time. They really haven't accomplished anything in the grand scheme of things. In other words, they accomplish a lot by doing every mitzvah. You're accomplishing a lot, but themselves, they are very recognizable from when they're a kid to when they're on the deathbed. It's the same evil inclination. So what was accomplished? If I didn't change anything at the core, what did I do?
It's almost like in the real world. The guy cut into a thing for his whole life. Never wants to be the farmer, never wants to be the owner, just sits there and chops away at the stuff, never getting any place, but doesn't care. Then you got the person who would have a very hard time, a person who wants to move up and accomplish things has a very hard time being a Beinoni because it's in life, at least with me, accomplish this, I move to the next one, accomplish this, move to the next, accomplish this. But being a Beinoni, I'm not getting any place. I'm spinning my wheels.
Exactly.
And I'm not, I
That's a
don't have any way of reaching the top.
It's a beautiful metaphor. So in other words, to take it very practically, the factory floor worker is, if he's content, if he's not looking to advance in life, then there are one of two reasons. Either because he finds purpose in life in doing that work, that would be a tzaddik. Or Russia would be, the metaphor would be someone who just couldn't care less. He just wants to make a few dollars. He just shows. No, the Beinoni is the person who wants to become the CEO. Now, for the average person, even though they know they may never become the CEO, for most people, there's where to grow. Now, even if you're going to be a factory floor worker, you may get a higher wage. There's always room to grow. But once the factory floor worker, or once anyone reaches a level that they know there's nowhere to grow from here, they can't make up more money if they work harder, they can't rise in rank, they can't grow, what happens automatically? They start to fizzle out. They start to lose their interest and desire. They may keep that job for the rest of their lives, but they're not going to be as excited as the day before they got that position. The day they got the position, and there is where to grow, but they know they'll never get there because the family will keep those positions in the family. As an outsider, he'll never get there. That's the day he stops putting in the effort up until now. Now, imagine you're a factory floor worker. You want to grow, but you know you never could. You're never going to work with more than you have to. You're never going to give it more than the 9 to 5. The same thing with Beinoni. The Beinoni knows he can never, in his own efforts, unless he wins the lottery, he can never become a tzaddik. He can never change himself. So why fight? Why fight if I can never change? There's a story. A story. It's told about a ganav. You know what a ganav is?
Yeah, thief.
A thief. He identifies one night, 3 o'clock in the morning, he's going to rob the rabbi's house. So he climbs into the chimney, he comes down, he shows up in the living room, and to his horror, he sees the rabbi sitting by the table, bent over a book, studying. The rabbi hears a commotion, lifts his head, and he sees the thief standing in front of him. So he says, "Yes, what can I do for you? What do you need at this late hour?" So the thief starts stuttering and says, Rabbi, I have 2 questions. The first question is, what am I doing here, and how do I get out of here? The Alter Rebbe is asking remember, the Alter Rebbe wrote Tanya because he had no time to speak to everyone individually. There was too many people coming to ask his advice. The Alter Rebbe wrote Tanya. In his introduction, he wrote, I heard all your questions, I heard all your complaints, I heard all your worries, I know all your soul's hurts. I'm writing a book that will answer all your questions. Alter Rebbe is talking to the person who's coming to him who can't find purpose and meaning in life. Every day I struggle and I never seem to advance in life. What do I do? So now the Alter Rebbe is going to lay down the foundation. Now, we're going to develop this question and answer over the next 3 chapters. But the Alter Rebbe is going to at least lay down the foundation of the answer to this question. Now, Alter Rebbe is going to quote a Zohar that gives a metaphor for a person from a candle. In a candle, there are 3 parts of the candle. The Zohar calls them the wick, the fire, and the oil. Now, a candle could be wax, it doesn't matter. Fuel, okay? We're right now we're in the middle of 466. We didn't yet, we're in the middle of 466. I'm just giving a brief introduction. Every candle, every fire has 3 elements. There's the wick, the fuel, and the fire. What happens when you have fuel and fire with no wick?
It burns out.
You have a lighter. The minute you let go of the thing, it goes out. So what's the point? So if you were to identify what's the main part of the candle, what would you say? Well, you need all 3. Without the fire, there's no candle. Without the wick, there's no candle. Without the fuel, there's no candle.
Well,
But if we wanted to divide it, the wick would be the most disconnected from the fire. Now, physically, it's connected. The fire is holding on to it, but that's all it's doing. It's not feeding the fire. The wick is just
for the
it's just the method with which to hold the fire in place, but it doesn't contribute anything it contributes to me being able to enjoy the fire, because without it, the fire just goes away, right? But it doesn't contribute anything to the flame. Whereas the oil or the wax or whatever else the fuel is actually fuels, it becomes part of the, becomes consumed by the fire and becomes part of the fire. The fire is fueled by and become, so the oil becomes part of the fire. The wick never becomes part of the fire. It's just holding on to the fire, right? That's why when the fire goes out, there's still a wick there. There's no fuel anymore.
There's no fuel.
Fire destroys the wick.
Yeah, but it doesn't consume the
It
wick.
doesn't consume it, but it destroys it from top down
What is it?
until there's no more wick.
No, many times there will still be a wick left. What's left of the, in other words, the wick is made up of many things.
Yeah.
The wick of the wick, in other words, the basic elements of the wick turn into ashes. The fuel, the wax that they put on the wick, or any of the moisture on the wick becomes, but that's really not wick. That's really also part of the fire. That's the fuel to the fire. It's just you have to separate the fuel from the actual wick itself. But the wick itself, okay. So that's the metaphor. What's what's it by the person? So the Zohar identifies that the fire is the spirit of God that's on the person. The wick is the body. And the fuel are mitzvahs, actions. Let's look at this inside. But as an introduction, the Alter Rebbe tells us that the person needs this answer almost like the person is mourning. The way he expresses this in the middle of 466, let this forthcoming explanation be their solace, to comfort them in a double measure of aid, and to gladden their hearts in God, who dwells among them in their Torah and divine service. In other words, the explanation will show them how to find comfort and joy in the godly light that abides within them when they study the Torah and when they engage in the service of God. It says, by the way, one of the reasons we do the bris on the 8th day, well, because it's dangerous to do it before that. But why is it dangerous? Why did God create the body in that way that you have to wait till the 8th day? So it says because the first 7 days the soul is in mourning, it's sitting shiva, because it forgot the whole Torah, right? The soul studies Torah in utero. Then when it's born, forgets the whole Torah, so it's sitting shiva on losing its identity almost. And that's why in Ashkenazi communities, the Shabbos before the bris, the Shabbos after the baby's born, we have what's called the Shalom Zachar. We welcome the boy, and it's customary to eat chickpeas, hummus, which is a food that we give to mourners because it's round, it's cyclical, right? It represents the cycle. It's mourners' food. It's considered mourners' food because the soul is in mourning. So the Alter Rebbe is going to comfort the soul, is going to comfort the person, because if you live life with no purpose, that's like being dead. It's like losing purpose and like that. So the Alter Rebbe is going to comfort us with the Zohar. What does the Zohar say? The above mentioned difficulties will be resolved by clarifying first the comment of the Yenuka. The Yenuka refers to a certain sage quoted in the Zohar, Parshas Balak, which is this week's Torah portion. Apropos, on the verse, the wise man's eyes are in his head. Do you know who came up with this amazing insight that a wise man's eyes are in his head? Who authored this verse, this amazing insight? The wisest man that ever lived. Who? Who was the wisest man that ever lived? King Solomon. King Solomon came up with this amazing insight. A wise man's eyes are in his head. The Zohar comments, where else are a man's eyes? Why is this? Why do we need Solomon to tell us this? Go out in the street. You'll see. Go find me a person that his eyes aren't in his head. Surely then the meaning of the verse is as follows. Obviously, it must mean something deeper. So the Zohar explains. We have learned that a man must not go 4 cubits while bareheaded, without a kippah. Why? Because the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests upon his head. Therefore, every wise man has his eyes, in other words, his interest and concern, and hence also his speech, concentrated in his head. In other words, in that light of the Shekhinah which rests and abides above his head. Now, when his eyes, in other words, his interest and his concern are there, in other words, above his head, in his head, he must know that this light kindled above his head, in other words, the light that shines upon his soul, requires oil. For man's body is the wick that retains the luminous flame, the soul, and the light is kindled above it. And thus King Solomon cried out, saying, let there be no lack of oil above your head. For the light over his head requires oil. Meaning, what does the Zohar say? What's the oil? Good deeds. The good deeds that man performs are the oil which supplies the light illuminating his soul. And for this reason, the wise man's eyes are in his head, to ensure that he never lacks oil, good deeds for the light. The question of this from the Zohar ends here. Okay, we're obviously gonna stop here, pause here for the week, but it's brought on many places, brought on in Code of Jewish Law, the obligation the to wear a kippah. And the first place it's mentioned, one of the first places mentioned is in the Talmud. It says that Reb Nachman's mother uh, once encountered a stargazer, and she told him, your son's going to be a thief. She became very concerned. So from the minute he was born, she put a keep on his head, and she would always tell him, make sure to wear your keep, make sure to wear your kippah, so that the fear of heaven is above you. To remind yourself of the soul that rests above you, of the fear of heaven. And he never really understood why his mother was so into it. It wasn't the thing then for little kids to. One day he was sitting under a palm tree, and either a wind came, somehow his kippah fell off, and at that moment he had his uncontrollable desire and urge to steal one of the fruit from the tree. And at that moment he realized how the kippah was protecting him, was reminding him of the fear of heaven above him. What do we see from this Zohar? Again, this is just bullet points. If we see ourselves as a wick to hold on to the fire, in other words, the soul in this world, then what's our purpose? To provide fuel.
Action.
And that's mitzvahs. So even though we're not getting rid of we're never going to turn the wick into fuel. The wick will stay a wick for its entire life. But that's why the wick was created, to be a wick. If the wick was going to turn into fuel, you know what happened to the candle?
Oh,
It would burn out. Imagine the wick fulfilled its purpose. After burning for a half hour, the wick turns into fuel and now provides another half hour of fuel to the fire. What happens after the wick turns into fuel? The fire goes out. Because the wick was created to be a wick. The Beinoni has to understand, we have to recognize we were created, not in order to make a living, we have to be janitors and we have to clean every day of our lives. That's a secondary purpose that you can either find purpose and meaning in or not. The very reason we were created, our bodies exist, the very reason we were born was to be a wick to the fire, to be a wick to the soul, to house God's soul, our soul, which is a piece of God, to house that, to contain that in this world for a certain amount of years, hopefully 120 years, healthy body and soul. What's my purpose? To create that union. How do you create the union between fire and wick? Through oil, through fuel. If we can convince ourselves, and you only need convincing if it's not clear as day that God created me and therefore I have a purpose. For most of us, it's not clear as day, or at least not most days. So the more we convince ourselves by recognizing that we were created by God for a reason, for a purpose, and this purpose is our bodies, the amount of pain and suffering it has to endure during this life. The purpose of it is never to become a soul. The purpose of the body is never to become something other than a body that struggles. The purpose is to be the wick that houses the soul, because God wants this soul to be in this world for a certain amount of time for some reason. If that's my purpose, then imagine one day you wake up and find out that the reason you were created was to change diapers. You're going to go out of retirement. You're going to volunteer in the hospital, in the maternity ward in the hospital, and you're going to change diapers until the day you die. Because if you found out conclusively that that was the purpose of your life, any minute you're going to spend not doing that will be a painful minute. Again, it's a hypothetical. You can't imagine such a thing. But Take your imagination where it will. Imagine, pick something that you will find out one day is the purpose of your existence. I guarantee you, you will not find pleasure in doing anything else in your life other than that purpose. You're going to have to eat. You're going to have to go home and go to sleep. But when you're going home and going to sleep, you know what you're going to be feeling? You're going to be feeling in pain that you're not able to do another few minutes of your purpose. And therefore, you're going to start spending more and more hours in the hospital. You're going to start taking naps more and more. You're going to start sleeping in your bed less and less. You're going to start finding ways to cut corners in your time you're eating and sleeping and doing all this. And this is what happens to a tzaddik, where a tzaddik, his whole life becomes devoted to God, to praying and studying, because the tzaddik, this is obvious. But this, we can also sort of enter this world where, but it starts from here. It starts from recognizing that we have a purpose and what that purpose is. And once we're convinced that this is our purpose, everything else becomes secondary. Now every choice we make in life is focused on, what's my purpose? Does this help me fulfill my purpose? At the end of the day, 12 o'clock at night, I need 5 hours of sleep to help me fulfill my purpose. So I'm going to go home and go to sleep. And the ultimate is that I eat and sleep willingly, happily, because it's all for my purpose. So that's why when we eat, we make a blessing. And when we eat breakfast Sunday morning, if we eat it because we know that's there, that I'm eating to help me fulfill my purpose, that breakfast becomes a holy breakfast. It becomes sanctified. It becomes literally a mitzvah. The biggest thing I could do. And that's why everything, anyhow, this is the key. This is the keyhole through which we will get into and hopefully come out in a few months with a more solid understanding of how this is going to make my life happier, more purposeful, and more fulfilling.
Is there like level?
Oh, 1 second. Whoever is going to watch this recording, next week we will not have class Monday morning.